Hey, we spoil all of the Time of Eve or Eve No Jenkin movie in this episode, if you haven't seen that, I recommend you go do it.
Hey everybody, and welcome back to the R Anime podcast, and welcome back to another edition of Movie Club Monday. Yay! Hopefully, we actually post this on a Monday and not a Friday like last time. But I'm also joined with 17 writers again. How you doing?
Hey, pretty good. How are you?
Great. So last time we watched one of your favorite anime movies that I had not seen, Princess Mononoke. So now we're gonna watch one of my favorite anime movies that you haven't seen, Eve no Jinken, otherwise known as Time of Eve. It originally came out in, I believe, 2009, and was then re-released as a movie because it was originally an ONA, which is an online. What was it again?
Online net animation or original net? Fuck,
Yeah,
I can't
that's it.
remember.
Original net animation.
Original net animation, yeah.
Yeah, and then it won an award for being like the best in the OVA category, which is kind of cool that it won an award. Then it was like readapted as a movie in 2010, and that's how I saw it, as a movie. And then I told you to watch it as a movie, and
Which I
here
did.
we are.
Yep.
Yeah. So, what did you think? First time impressions. We just watched it like literally 10 minutes ago. We finished. So, what did you think?
Yeah, so I really, really enjoyed it. It felt like it was a movie that made like really good use of its time. As much as it was a series, I guess originally, it
Mm-hmm.
felt like a film in terms of how it was kind of concise in its use of material and really kind of used exactly what it needed to get the emotional impact out of its runtime. While also not being kind of afraid to dive into digressions. I think a lot of the fun of the movie was kind of delving into the stories of all of these side characters and stuff like that, and it handled that pretty well, even if not all of them were sort of as compelling as the main plot,
Mm-hmm.
or I guess kind of like the core cast. But yeah, overall, I think this film didn't. I didn't feel like it was very flawed.
Mm-hmm.
There were a couple of things that I took a little bit of issue with, but overall, I think this is going to be a high 8 or low 9 for me after I've let it kind of simmer for a little bit.
Nice. That's awesome to hear. I'm so glad
Uh,
you liked it and didn't hate it, because we like, I think last time we like kind of like PM during Princess Mononoke, even though I was like completely focused, but this time like we didn't talk at all, so I was like, this is either a good thing or a terrible thing. So I'm glad it was a good thing.
yeah, no, definitely a good thing. It had emotional impact. The reason that I'm just kind of like teetering on ratings is because I'm not sure if it hit me at the same level that I would normally give a
Mm-hmm.
9, but at the same time, it's the kind of movie that might just kind of be on my brain for a while afterwards, so it may end up getting a higher rating than I think I would give it right now out the gate. But either way, like an 8 for me is something that I consider to be a genuinely great like film or something, and I think this was actually great.
Yeah, it's really a cool one because I think it was kind of tough to describe it initially when I pitched it to you, but the blanket statement I say for it is it's kind of like iRobot but as a slice of life, you know?
Yeah. Well, I mean, so kind of draws heavily on
Yeah,
Asimov, right? The original writer of
iRobot.
like all of the stuff that kind of led to iRobot. Yeah.
Yeah,
Because it's drawing on his rules of robotics and stuff like that.
yeah,
I was a little bit, I guess, disappointed that it brought all of that stuff up at the very beginning and didn't really explore some of the elements of the ethical question that I feel like were sort of begged in that moment. Like,
mm-hmm,
I think my biggest disappointment in the movie, which isn't huge, is that kind of the face of this anti-robot organization was painted as a father who, or like a really kind of shitty father who was upset that his son was taken away from him by a nanny robot, basically.
yeah,
Um, Instead of, I think there's a very complex question to be had of once we create something that can learn in the way that these androids really can, we don't know what they're going to be capable of at some point.
yeah.
Um,
I'd
and
agree with that. Yeah,
and I think that that's a genuine reason for concern and fear, and so I think I guess humanizing the bigots a little bit more in the android world would be interesting to me, because I do think that as much as this movie was portraying the androids as these like kind and likable characters, there is another side to that argument, and there is a
yeah,
reason why people would be afraid.
yeah. And I think it was I think almost the morality of the robots and the whole, like treating them as humans versus treating them as robots, which is kind of a really simplified way of saying, like, do things with human capabilities such as feelings deserve to be treated as humans? Like, I think the morality of it was a lot stronger in showing the two main characters. I always forget their names because I frankly think they're kind of irrelevant. Like, remembering them is kind of irrelevant, but it's Ryuko and Masaki. So it's like the main guy and his friends. I will refer to them as that because that's kind of what they are.
Fair enough.
Yeah, so I think their morality and how they view the androids around them is a lot more interesting than, like, the one guy's dad, who's the head of the ethics committee, who's trying to shut down treating robots as people and having them live in homes and giving them, like, human attributes. I found their morality and showing the, like, not so linear way they came to see androids in a different light a lot more interesting and a lot more authentic than just, like, robots are bad, we shut them down,
Yeah, and see, I 100% agree with that. I guess kind of how I felt, and I think that was always going to be the emotional core of the film. I just wish there had been a little bit more fleshed out into what the ethics committee was doing, because it just kind of felt like, oh, these guys over here are bad, and so and maybe that's fine. The movie also kind of heavily hinted at sequel stuff, so I would like to see more.
Yeah.
It left a lot of open questions and things like that, and honestly, it did a good enough job that I would be very interested to see any more if something else came out.
Yeah, I'm not sure if they're gonna do a sequel, especially since it's like 8 years later. And
it's been so long. It seems like they were wanting a sequel at the time when they made it, though.
Yeah, they did do a lot. There's also, like, a lot of I'd say there's a lot of subplots in the world building and for the characters that don't really get a lot of focus, but they do get hinted on a lot, which, like, you'll notice the credit scene and how they mention that one incident where the anti-robot groups caused, like, some kind of riot and then some girl got hurt. And it's like, it's not even hinted. I think they're trying to say that, like, the main girl who runs the cafe was the girl who got hurt in that incident, and then she was raised by a robot, so then she sees them as, humans because one raised her, and that's why she has such compassion for them.
So was she raised by... Okay, so this guy had robotic parts, but he referred to the other robots as his children at the very end of the after credits scene. I'm kind of wondering if he's the guy who invented them.
Yeah, he might be that. Yeah, he might be them, actually. Okay, that makes more sense, because I was always kind of iffy on it. Like, I kind of got that he was, like, a fatherly figure, but I wasn't sure if he was a robot or if he was, like, a robot figure.
Yeah, it's unclear to me, too.
Yeah.
But yeah, I thought the after credit scene and also, like, kind of those images in the credits were really strong and well done. I don't think it needed to develop. That was not one of the loose ends that I felt like needed to be developed more. I thought that was actually really well presented.
Yeah, I did like it. I'm just dumb, so I was like, I'm not sure if what this means. So
no, I'm not quite sure who he is either, and I would probably like more information on that. But, like, kind of going back through and seeing how they clearly moved multiple times and have been trying to kind of set up this cafe and set up this relationship, and I think adding depth to that character. What was her name again? It was Nagi.
Nagi, yeah. I remember her a lot more than the guys, which makes sense.
Yeah. But I think that kind of, like, last bit of characterization of her and, like, what she went through in childhood of kind of, like, growing up and trying to set up these cafes, watching these robots fall apart was really, really compelling.
Yeah.
There's just a lot of, like, really strong, small emotional stuff like that in this movie that I think is what really ties it all together, regardless of how some of the stuff, like, the anti-robot movement being kind of painted in broad strokes. I think I think what the film does really well is those tiny little emotional core moments, I guess.
Yeah, I definitely agree. I think this is my third time watching the movie, because I watched it a while ago, then I watched it again with my mom, then I unintentionally watched it again with my mom today. But but I was able to really pick up on a lot of things that made the movie so memorable to me, because I'd probably call this my fourth favorite anime movie overall. And it does hold up on rewatch, so I'm glad to see my appreciation for it hasn't really diminished. But one of the things I wanted to, like, really give a shout out to was, I think the beginning scene does so much world building and characterization all within, like, 5 minutes. And I was really impressed upon rewatching it, because they show, like, the main character and his robot Sammy, and he's, like, he's using his phone to, like, go through her log of, like, what she did. and that's where he finds out about like that one phrase, like, are you enjoying your time at Eve? And it looks out of place, but the TV in the background did such a great job of world building, where it shows, oh look, here's the news showing how food production is up 80%, and it's showing all these robots helping that. Then the next is kind of this, I'm not sure if it's kind of like a propaganda type commercial, but it shows like a tomato, and then when someone squeezes it, there's like robot parts that come out, which are obviously kind of like,
Yeah, and so maybe this organization really is just crazies, right? Because it was also painted as like, the one guy was like, yeah, this start, I can't remember who it was who said it, but one of the guys at the cafe was saying that this organization that was now the ethics committee was first just a straight up robot hate group. So it may be that they are not the people who I should be looking for having a rational argument against the proliferation of robots. So who knows?
Yeah.
I think
But
I think the world building was strong in a lot of ways, but it also left a lot of open questions.
Yeah, because we never really got to see any kind of like, here are the amount of incidents caused by robots. We don't get to see, even though they might have a somewhat like radical, completely illogical viewpoint that's very extremist, we don't know why they have those in the first place. Like, they could show something or mention something about, like, there's this huge incident where, like, robots were supposed to do something and then they saved people, but then they didn't, so now people hate robots, or, like, they lost their jobs due to robots. A lot of reasons that people would have that could form really extreme hatred viewpoints,
Right, and that would also be really interesting to explore. Yeah. So I was thinking of it from the perspective of someone who is, like, kind of thinking about the theory of AI, like kind of like from the Asimov perspective, but also from the just kind of individual perspective, without really understanding the full implications of what they're talking about. There would be plenty of reasons to be upset about robots that don't make so much sense from an academic perspective. Or maybe they do. Maybe the robots do come in and because they probably would end up like there would be a major upheaval in terms of the workplace market.
Yeah, I mean, they just showed, how many robots did they show taking over like childcare roles, or there's the one that was like taking notes for the one committee, or like just so many small everyday things where like robots are doing functions that humans would originally do, so people are losing work, even if it might seem like there are huge net positives for the country, because they said like 80% increase in agricultural output internally, so it's like they're not relying on other countries, which a lot of people value, like being independent and stuff as a government. But I do think
but you have to have something that people shift to in a capitalist economy. Otherwise, you just have a bunch of people without jobs, and you're producing enough food, but nowhere no one can buy it.
So that would be an interesting commentary on like the change in the economy due to robots and androids.
Yeah, I mean that is a legitimate question. As automation increases, like that's. But again, it's not bad necessarily that this film doesn't choose to explore it. It's just kind of a question that it raises without. So it raises the film raises a lot of questions, and I don't think that's necessarily a problem, but it does leave me kind of just burning for a sequel mostly.
I really would like to see more, and I would like to see more of like this world specifically. I think the world building itself, I think it's might be the strongest aspect, but I do really like some of the character stories they have. But I was thinking about it, because this is something I thought, like, ever since I saw the first movie, and I'm not sure if I really want this answered or not, but there's always the question of, like, how did the robots develop human capabilities such as emotions?
Yeah, or did they? And that's also another question that I feel like the film didn't really touch on, is that at some point, can robots just be emulating humans?
Yeah.
And at what point does it matter? And I think that's one of the most interesting ethical questions in kind of all of that is, at some point, if robots act like humans and completely react like humans, do you treat them like humans or do you not?
Yeah, exactly. Like what do you need? It's like the question of like, what do you need to see from a non-human to feel like it ethically deserves to be treated like a human?
Yeah, and to me, that's a really fascinating question. I don't think it's bad that this movie didn't tackle it, because, again, there's a lot of other stuff. I mean, Asimov is the good example that comes up, right? Yeah. But there's a lot of other stuff that tackles these questions. So this film doesn't need to, and I think it was trying to tell more of a character story, which is fine, and it does good world building in service to that. So I don't put that as like a mark against the film almost, more as just something that I kind of wanted to see more explored, at least in one of those avenues.
Yeah, for sure. I can't help but make a lot of like mental connections to iRobot, as I mentioned later on. And I feel like
Right.
iRobot is the type of like high octane extreme story that does try to answer those questions and, like present cases for and against. Whereas this
Hmm.
one was really like, yeah, we're in that type of setting, but we're just going to focus on how androids have influenced these individual characters. It's like
Yeah.
it's
Which I
interesting.
think is a fantastic premise.
Yeah, yeah,
So
definitely.
I'm really happy with that, and I'm kind of happy that they didn't go the more action route with this, because I
Yeah.
think that it's I think that it's really compelling and interesting to see a story that you would normally see explored by like action heroes or something like that, actually like answering these big questions, instead being explored by children. And I think they did a really good job of having these high school students legitimately come off like high school students.
Yeah,
um
definitely.
that's one of the things that like you'll see in a lot of anime and stuff like that, where it's like, oh, it's a high school kid, but it doesn't really, but like those characters don't really come off as their age.
Yeah.
I think this movie does a really fantastic job of having all of the human characters come off as down to earth characters, like in the social position that they're in.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah, it definitely felt very genuine. I noticed the dialogue, especially this time around, the dialogue is just so like very authentic feeling and down to earth. Like, the two friends are always giving each other shit in one way or another. You can tell that like the main character's best friend, he has a lot of misgivings over androids and robot culture as it is, but he's not just gonna like make a big scene in front of the main character. He's just gonna give him shit a lot, like, oh, it seems like you really like your android Sammy, or like, tell Sammy I said hi. Those kind of teasings that feel very authentic. And then
yeah. I
yeah.
mean, especially given his own emotional baggage and how he feels like his friend is falling down the same rabbit hole and trap that he did, as it turns out
Mhm.
later in the movie. I think that's really, really cool.
And it's interesting how I really like how just everyone interacts with each other, but also I think they do a really great job with like the sound design, because I think the
Hmm.
music they play really well shows the emotional tone, but then the sound design, especially in that one scene where they had like the older robot that comes in and they almost have like the horror thriller music, and then they just show him like sitting down normally. They do a lot of like good jump cuts with that. So I
Right.
appreciate the like tonality. I don't know if that works, but like I like how they jump from tones a lot of times in a comedic sense. But I do
Yeah,
think
well,
it's
that one in particular, I thought was a fantastic scene. I actually want to just like pause and stop on that
yeah.
there for a
I had a
minute, if
feeling
you're all right with that.
Yeah, I had a
Um,
feeling you would really like that, and I didn't know why. I was like, I think 17's really gonna love this section, and I'm excited to hear why.
okay, well, because I think the robot story in that moment is really, really compelling if you do
Hmm.
assume that it does have feelings and stuff like that. Because
Yeah.
because if so I really like the way they transition from a scene that sort of played for comedy into
Hmm.
something really, really dark. But you don't quite realize it at first. But just think about that for a minute. Of this being has had so much of its memories deleted and just has like these
Hmm.
tiny fragments that it's managed to piece together, and
Yeah.
is really trying to find some caring somewhere and something to latch onto, as well as being kind of stuck in obeying this system of rules. I thought it was a really well delivered scene that, of course, does first come off as funny in this kind of like breaking
Hmm.
machine, and then you realize just how I don't know. I felt like it was crushingly sad.
Oh yeah.
Um, and all of the characters' reactions to it felt so genuine. Yeah,
Oh
that scene
yeah.
might be my favorite scene in the movie, actually.
I think I knew it would be. I had a feeling it would be your favorite. I just knew. I was like, this is one of those scenes that I think is like kind of iconic to the film. But even though like it definitely captures me and I enjoy it, I knew that you would enjoy it more than I would, and that you would have a lot more to say on it. And
Yeah,
and
I didn't realize I was going to have more to say on it until you mentioned it. Like, I passed the scene in the
yes.
movie and it didn't immediately leave that much impact, but then as soon as you mentioned it, I was like, wait a second, that scene was awesome.
I think it was
Like,
also showed a turning point for the characters because it's one of the only robots that we've seen up until that point that looks and acts like a robot. So it begs the question of do you've been talking to robots this entire movie and you've been kind of forced to treat them as humans because of the setting and because they look and act like humans, but what happens when you encounter a pure robot that does express emotions but you can't pretend it's a human? Like everyone in the room knew it was a robot, and it's like, are you still gonna obey the rules and not discriminate between human and robot in this instance.
Right, and that transitions really fantastically into the Friends arc. So as even as like a I guess a point of film utility, that scene was used really well, as in addition to just being a good scene on its own.
Yeah, and it showed a lot for Nagi, how she genuinely cares about robots. It doesn't matter who or what they are. She has a love for them, that she wants to respect them as, like fellow beings no matter what.
Right,
And,
which also transitions nicely into the emotional core of the end of film kind of slideshow, because I thought just that image, just the still image of like her being her and like her father or whatever being upset over all of the broken robots, that was really emotionally impactful to me. And I think that was really nicely set up by showing how she doesn't view the robots that are emulating humans as that different from the ones that are machines, as you can see from kind of the old cafes where they just look like robots.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I got to talk about the last arc, because I always loved this last arc. It always hits hard. Whenever I think about this arc, it just really hits hard. And one of the things that stood out to me is, the main character's best friend up until this point, he's been anywhere from uncomfortable but tolerant to outwardly aggressive towards robots. I'd say that was his like scale of opinions on androids up until this point.
Right.
But then you always know, like we know, ooh, there's got to be some reason as to why he thinks and feels this way. We're like, we know there's something. And then we get to see how his house robot, I think it's Tex. He calls it Tex.
Yeah, Tex.
Yeah, he it like took care of him as a kid, and then his dad saw that like he was growing too close to Tex, and he was treating it like a human, and then he like cuts off the robot's ability to talk. So then like this poor kid thinks that like the robot doesn't love him anymore and won't, like, no matter what he does, like won't talk back to him, which I think is like, in the context of this show, like really fucked up, like sufficiently fucked up. Like,
they did a really good job of characterizing the father, as much as I am upset about kind of the lack of anti-robot arguments, but we can get into that in a second. Yeah. And anyway, continue with what you were saying.
But and this is all kind of like, I think it's really powerful, but I do think we've all seen this before, where like something happens to a character, it really hurts them, and then they kind of carry this baggage with them. But a lot of times I think in story arcs, we always get to the point of they learn something and, it almost completely changes their emotional trauma. But what I love about this movie is the main character's friend realized what happened. He knew that his dad forbid the robot from talking to him, and he was able to understand that as he got older, what caused his past emotional trauma, but that didn't erase his emotional trauma or his misgivings over getting attached to robots in the future. And I think that's a really mature, nuanced way of handling something, because there's so many times when something happens to us and we can rationalize how it happened, we can kind of like make the best of it, but that doesn't change that we were hurt by this thing in the past and we want to prevent being hurt like that again. So I love how they show the scene of him saying like, yeah, I knew my dad turned him off, but as a kid, it still like destroyed me. This was like my best friend, this cared for me, but it really destroyed me. And you guys are all like pulling the same shit. Like, they can't care for you as real people. Like, they can't do it because someone can just turn off that function of them. And then what do you have left? You don't have it. You have nothing. And then when Tex like realizes that he's in trouble and starts talking to him, like, and he just like completely loses his shit. I almost lose my shit. It's just like so emotionally gripping of like, what were you thinking all those times? Why were you like, what were you doing? It was just like so emotional, but so touching. And I love it.
Yeah, for sure. That was a really, really strong scene. That was a really well built up section of the film. I like they do a lot with small expressions and things like that in that movie, which I feel like is again something that you'll oftentimes miss in anime.
Yeah.
But this one I feel like did a really good job of just kind of having the physicality of the character acting really speak for a lot. And I think without seeing much of the father, you really understood what his relationship with the friend was, and and kind of how all of that had come to be, and how the father saw this robot almost as at fault for his shitty relationship with his son, which damn, like that just felt very real and yeah, like something that would really happen between people, and so of course you insert robots into the situation, and this is the kind of story that you'll end up with.
Yeah.
It all just felt very natural and organic, I guess, and I really appreciated it.
Yeah, and I think they handled it in just such a really nice way. And then it was just like it was really raw, and I think it's interesting for a movie like this that has very simple but like distinct character designs and like that dynamic CGI background, that you have something that raw when everything feels so like what is the word I'm thinking of? So clean cut, but like sanitized. Like everything feels clean cut, like they have their place in it. And then you have such a raw emotional outburst that it really just feels more jarring than it would normally.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. Yeah, no arguments here. This was just a really well constructed film. Like I feel like whoever was making this, or I guess making the OVAs originally,
Yeah.
really knew what pieces they needed to include to get the maximum impact out of their runtime. Is how it felt.
Yeah.
Because it didn't feel like they were rushing anything, but it was still a really short runtime to have kind of built the attachment and understanding of the characters that it did, and
Yeah.
and even then, like a lot of the runtime of that movie was kind of spent on digressions, which was important to the film, but it makes it even more impressive that they're kind of bouncing around between all of these things, and yet those individual individual final arc can still manage to be so compelling.
Yeah, exactly. Because it does have like has a lot of different focuses. It does a lot. It does a lot, as you said, in like a really short amount of time. And I feel like even though I could probably think of like some aspects that were somewhat less compelling, I think they still kind of added to that moment. So I feel like it was all worth it.
Yeah, because I think a lot of the point was kind of developing this coffee shop
Yeah.
as a sort of family, and so I think it's fine that you're not necessarily going to be as emotionally invested as in all of the characters in the coffee shop, but I do think it was important that they spent time on those digressions and exploring their individual stories, so it could feel like these characters were all a part of our main characters' lives by the time we hit that final conclusion.
Yeah, exactly. And I think, yeah, like when I think about it, like the main character, I think is an important character because he shows almost kind of like the audience's perspective of like, yeah, they act human, but like I can't really treat them as humans because society would deem me as almost kind of like a robot weeaboo. And then,
Right.
but like they're crucial to everyday life and I care about them, but how much can I care about them without being weird? You know, his non-linear development was really interesting to me, but it didn't really I didn't find it as compelling, of course, as his friend's big scene. But I still think it's important. Like I think his development is still crucial to the film. It's just not what stands out to me as much.
Yeah, it's not what stands out to me as much either, but I do think that his development was kind of used to give the audience a tour through all of these characters, because of course his development was kind of coming to be more understanding of these robots and people who are here, I guess. And so through that, like his kind of stumbling to understand all of these people is what allows us a window into this world. So I think regardless of whether him or his friend's story was more compelling, it was a good choice to focus on him, because because I think he was the best sort of insert moment to get a tour of this world. I also think moving forwards, which I'm sad that there's probably isn't going to be more, because you're right, it's 2009 and it makes me sad. But I think he would also be a good focus further on, because I think that he's kind of the more active character.
Yeah.
Which didn't turn out to be that necessary for this film, but if it were to be continued, I think it makes sense to focus on him.
Yeah, definitely. And I'm looking at the Mal page, and I'm sad that it says Ivno Jinkan first season complete edition, as if there will be a second season, because I feel like it's baiting me, even though I have no idea if there'll be another season. And it's kind of like
probably not.
Yeah. Yeah, I did.
It makes me salty, but
yeah, someone posted in January, 8 years no sequel, and no one replied, which is pretty accurate for of like, Malform asking if there's going to be a sequel. No replies from both other users and probably from the studio. But
yeah, Yeah.
I will
Right.
take, but I will take what we got. You mentioned something more about like you wanted to touch upon again, like more of like the friend's dad and like kind of the lack of focus on the anti-robot crowd.
Yeah, I don't think there was much more I wanted to talk about. I mostly just wanted to
Mm-hmm.
talk about how even though I felt like the anti-robot crowd didn't get as much focus and characterization as I would have liked. I mean, I guess
Mm-hmm.
especially since the friend would have been tied up in all of that and kind of
Yeah.
have heard more of his father's arguments than just like than just kind of his emotional baggage, which obviously his emotional baggage about robots is what's important to him.
Yeah.
But I think it would make sense for him to have a little bit more rationality built up as to why he thinks
Yeah.
robots are not um are never going to be like humans.
The dad or the
Um
friend?
the friend.
Okay. I
Um
think he does. I think his like cuz I think his main argument was not like fuck robots, they suck. It's like you guys are foolish for treating robots as humans because they're never going to be humans, as indicated by my past where I was treating this robot as a fellow human and my dad was just easily able to like shut this off as a human companion.
yeah, and I think that's fair. I guess just from my perspective, I feel like oh, they're not going to be humans, they're never going to be humans is a way to say, oh, all of these robot weeboos, as you call them, I like that,
Yeah.
are it's a way to say that they're kind of weird and living in a fantasy, but it's
Yes.
not a good argument for why robots shouldn't act like humans
Yeah,
or why
okay.
robots shouldn't be in this position.
That makes
Whereas
sense.
um, whereas I think that there are more legitimate arguments that could have been there for the sort of fear or whatever that these people seem to have of them, where they're obviously concerned about robots gaining more and more place in society,
Mm-hmm.
and I think there are reasons you could argue why that would be bad or upsetting in terms of just like not knowing um, what they're ultimately going to be capable of. What at what point does their ability to just rapidly learn stop, or does
Yeah.
it? And are we okay with having these intelligences way beyond our own, or at least deeply different from our own and beyond us in some aspects, just sitting around right next to us? But that never felt like that was really addressed. And as you brought up, the stealing jobs argument might be what these anti-robot people had. And
Yeah.
it just bugs me a little bit to never quite see that.
Yeah, I agree. I do think it would be cool to focus on like those serious aspects and kind of see like I definitely would like to know more.
Yeah, and again, I don't think it needs a ton of focus. I think this
Yeah.
story did a good job of having it be from the perspective of kids. And I like it for that. But I do think that some of these kind of more adult arguments would have trickled down to the kids, I suppose.
Yeah, definitely. Like you could
So
have
even if it were just touched on, I would have liked to see a little bit of it.
yeah, definitely. And they've done such a good job of communicating like a lot of information in a short amount of time that I feel like they could have found a way to kind of sneak that in.
Yeah,
You know,
I agree with that.
even as,
And
like,
again,
a-
this is if this is my one gripe about the film, it's
Yeah.
a fucking fantastic film. But I do, but that is something that kind of bugged me a little bit throughout, as I felt like I was kind of just like waiting for something like that to drop, and then it just never really did.
Yeah. And there are like small things that I'm always in the case of like is it me for not like reading into it enough and not noticing as much, or is it the movie's fault for not doing a good enough job of like providing answers? You know, I'm always like caught between the two of there's the two characters at the beginning talking, and it's the one guy who always comes around the cafe who we see talking at the end. I'm not sure what I forget what his role was. Like, I'm not sure. I don't think he's part of the ethics committee, but he's definitely investigating the cafe, and I'm not sure who he's investigating on behalf of.
Yeah,
know-
again, there are a lot of open questions at the end of that.
And then there's the question of why does Sammy have a memory of like the white-haired chick he was talking to, almost like attacking her in her memory? Like, what was that?
Yeah.
Like, that was like a thing that they brought that was like shown, and it was like a really quick scene, but like I still don't know why. Like, I still don't know what's going on with that, and I'm not sure if that's just kind of like, oh, they hinted at this stuff and it was showed like, you know, they carry on memories per se, because they did hint at like the robots carry on memories, or they communicate information to one another, which is how they find the cafe. But I'm still not really sure what that all means. Like, I'm not really sure what this means other than they're, like, observing the cafe, and then they mentioned the guy who made the robots, who was a guardian to Nagi. Like, I'm just not really sure. And it's not like, it's kind of like what you were saying, where it's like, it's not really, like, a huge gripe, but it is, like, something I wonder that I feel was unanswered, and it makes me confused. So I'm just kind of like, I'm not really sure.
Yeah, and I think a lot of that, at least from my impression, is down to the fact that I think they really wanted a sequel.
Yeah, I can see
I think
that.
this was really meant to be a part one of something else.
Yeah.
And it makes me really sad that it's probably not going to be, but I do think it's great as a standalone.
Yeah.
But I just can't see a reason to leave some of the open questions that they did if they weren't planning on having more. I don't think it's always bad to leave open questions in a film, but in this one, it almost felt like they were seeding things for later that they just never got a chance to really jump in on.
Yeah, because they do present a lot of intrigue that feels like they want to follow up on it, but then they just, like, never do. And it feels like at the end that they're like, ooh, we're hinting at this thing. Maybe we'll talk about it next time, but unfortunately there is no next time, which is sad for all of us.
Yup. Because, again, very good film, and I do think it was relatively self-contained. I kind of wish that they hadn't had the sequel baiting if they were never going to get a sequel, because it's just going to leave all of those burning questions in my head, but oh well.
Yeah,
I don't think that's a major gripe I have with it, it just makes me slightly salty.
Yeah, same. I want to see more of Tex and his best friend reuniting. Oh, I love that even after the, like, super emotional scene, like, they always have, like, this dialogue that's, like, stuff that I or, like, other viewers would think. Like, Tex is trying to leave the cafe, and he just, like, runs into the stairs because he doesn't have legs. And then the best friend is like, how did he get down here? And they're like, oh, we carried him.
Yeah, no, I love that too, because I was thinking the entire time, how did he get down there? And I was also thinking as he's going through the door, they're just going to cut out, aren't they? They're not going to show this, and they didn't. I was like, oh, thank you for that.
Because that's, like, just such an authentic thing, where you have, like, a huge emotional moment, and then, like, something funny happens, and everyone's just like, yeah, so, like, this is what happened. And
and this film does a great job with tone and coming off so authentic in its ability to just kind of mesh tones together without feeling like it's stepping on its own toes.
Yeah. Yeah, it's good because, sometimes people criticize how it's, like, feels too jarring. If you, like, go between serious and comedy, it can feel, like, really jarring. But this one just feels really natural in how quickly it shifts back and forth, because I think they kind of, like, wrap everything up well enough. Like, that scene was wrapped up well, and then we could move on to something being funny, because it is funny to think of, how did this robot with no legs get down the stairs?
Yeah, for sure. And then the example of my favorite scene, which I find it funny that you pegged that.
Yeah, I knew it.
It does a really good job of making you almost feel bad for finding the previous scene funny, as you see how kind of, like, dramatic and awful it is. So I think it does a really great job shifting tones.
Yeah. Yeah, it's overall, like, I think it's a really solid experience. I feel like it's, like, pretty easy to recommend too, because there's not too much, like, weird anime shit. And even though, like, instance of, I think it's, like, the main character looking at that one robot's, like, huge boobs, and his friend is like, what are you looking at? It's almost like they're telling, like, the viewer, like, what are you looking at that's, like, robot's boobs? Like, what are you doing? And it's pretty funny. It was pretty funny how they executed that.
Yeah, and I also think they do a good job of executing the main character's dynamic through that, of just, like, I loved the, oh, like, you've awakened or whatever line. Of just, like...
Yeah, that was great.
Yeah. And it does feel like, as much as it is kind of, just a little bit, toxic and shitty, it does feel like the banter between high school students, and it doesn't feel like, it feels mostly harmless. Like, it's just, okay.
I think it's classic, like, because I think they're kind of supposed to be, like, somewhat ignorant of the android struggles, and it feels like an ignorant conversation, but not a harmful one. Like, they're not saying it out of malice, they're just like, dude, boobs. And they didn't know if she was a robot or human, which is kind of like the, like, you don't know, fam, like, you don't know what you're looking at. But it's also, like, just how obvious he is. It was really funny. Like, I think it's really funny, because they do a great job of presenting, like, ignorance, but as, like, someone who's learning to think differently, which is always cool to see.
Which is also why I thought the scene where the main character is like, everyone hates me, was really strong, and kind of the I keep forgetting her name, but like the barista's like reaction of wait, what the fuck to that?
Yeah.
Because I think the main character, I think it was really compelling in terms of how it set up the main character is feeling about himself, like had been an insensitive ass at every single step in this cafe, whereas to everyone else it's like no, he was just kind of learning about how people interact here.
Yeah, exactly.
And
it's also so compelling of like he thinks he's just being a huge asshole because he's had so many awkward missteps, but for all of them, especially the androids, like they just want someone to talk to them as an equal. Like they don't even
and that's
care
genuinely
like...
what he's trying to do, and so they appreciate him for that. And so it's like okay, that makes sense. Yeah, and also like the backstory with Sammy and stuff like that, and kind of getting how much he had felt like he had fucked up in that circumstance. There's a lot that was just really good there. And again, they didn't need to spell things out explicitly and did a lot through kind of expressions and flashbacks, which I thought was really, really strong.
Yeah, like this whole sub arc of like, oh yeah, I forget. I think it was because I kind of forgot about it, but I think his whole thing was like he was a really good piano player, but then maybe it was like an android piano player like beat him or something at a competition.
Yeah, it was not entirely clear to me, but yeah, that's what it seemed like. And also, what really hit him was that he was moved by the androids playing, I think.
Yeah, I think that could also speak to the, like, they hinted throughout the movie about, like, androids doing art, and I think it was, like, society was not comfortable with the idea of androids taking over positions they thought only humans could take over. Like, music, art, any form of the arts, like, how are they able to express creativity? You know, it's one thing if they handle all our agriculture and do machine-like things, but what happens when they do human-like things? And they beat us at it.
Right.
So, that's, like, the interesting aspect, which would be more interesting to see covered, but it was, like, they kind of hinted at it, but I think it's kind of, at least my bad memory and all, like, I kind of forgot about it, so I think it kind of takes the back seat in a way that it would be more interesting to see, focused on.
Yeah, I mean, again, this movie stimulated a lot of things I really wanted to see. I kind of thought a direction they were going to go, and maybe it was just, maybe this was something they were seeding for later, and maybe it was completely unrelated, was the main character teaching his android how to play piano. But
yeah, I like that.
But again, which I thought would have been really fascinating of kind of moving into this notion of androids and people making art together. But again, I don't think they needed to go that direction. That was just something that like struck me as interesting that I kind of thought they were going to do.
Yeah, that would actually be really interesting too. I'd be like totally down to see that. I mean, if they ever had like a sequel to it, like I would definitely be down to see that be the focus of it.
Yeah. That was what I would guess a sequel would be, but I really have no idea. There's again, they left so many loose ends there that it could be just about anything, and also probably nothing. But
yeah.
Oh well.
Oh well, we can dream for another day for a sequel. I'm glad we got this though. I generally really enjoy like sci-fi slice of life settings, so I feel like this is like definitely one of my favorite sci-fi series and slice of life series. This was a good movie pick. So thank you for this one. No problem. I'm glad you liked it. I think that's all I had to say. I didn't even know I had this much to say about it, but I'm glad you liked it so much, so it wasn't me defending it or something. So
just about same. I don't think I have that much more to add. I enjoyed the film a lot.
Yay! Well, I guess next time on Movie Club Monday, which will probably not come out on a Monday. I've resigned to the Monday just being part of like the meme and sounding cute. But the next time we're going to be watching a movie that neither of us have seen, so that should be pretty interesting because we don't really know what to expect.
I'm excited.
I'm hyped. Well, thank you everyone again for listening. If you have anything you wanted to add, agree with, disagree with, leave it in the comments below. Subscribe, follow us on Twitter, join our Discord, and tune in next time. Thanks for listening.